Yeah, I've already presented myself, so we'll be talking today about an experience of developing a language plugin and how it feels when you are using language server instead of a native IntelliJ support. So a couple words about me just to reiterate. So I was a biologist in bioinformatician in the past, and then I switched to front-end engineering, and now I'm working at consultant agency, and sometimes we need to work with different technologies, and I stumbled upon a language that's called Luau. That's like derivation of Lua with types, which didn't have any support in IntelliJ. Yeah, and given that I like IntelliJ idea and all other IDEs, and I hate VS Code, I was like thinking that it would be easier to write a plugin than to make my piece of VS Code. So I decided to do that. And let's start with the answering the question, do people still create new languages? Because you may think that I just stumbled upon a language no one uses, and then nowadays you don't need to do that. But actually it's not exactly like that, because we're not creating that many languages nowadays. So it was only like 29 new languages since 2010s and 3 languages since 2020s. That was Gleam, Mojo for AI stuff, and Carbon. That's the letter C on the slide. It's not C language, it's a Carbon. Yeah, but also language support is not limited by the language itself. It's also frameworks and stuff around them. So frameworks still emerge and on the front end every day, I guess. So we have things to work with languages and create plugins for. So you can see that there are 293 programming language plugins now on the marketplace. So what IDE gives us, I think like everyone on this talk accepts that IDE is better than no IDE, like working with just Sublime, we only have the highlight. So IDEs give us clever completions, which you can rate and do some AI stuff nowadays. We have inline hints, we have a lot of clever documentation, we have quick fixes and different sophisticated things like this one. So for example, we can check if the documentation is in sync with the code. So the code here is returning a list of strings and the documentation says that it's an array. So we can check that with some like language models, I think, and then provide some diagnostics. So how IntelliJ native support looks like, I dig up some from Web Archive, some 2008 JetBrains documentation, and actually it looks almost the same. So like the set of features that was supported is the same, except for the inlay hints that are the most recent addition. And how much code does it take? So while working on my plugin, I was using a lot of plugins like as a reference to see how the things are done, and I was mostly using these 5, and they are not that big actually, like under 50 Ks of lines of code, and unless you're working on Rust, and Rust is a big programming language with a lot of stuff to do. So it's quite manageable, I would say, to create a native support. But then there are other IDEs as well. So for example, we have new IDEs like Helix, we have Z, and we have the older ones. We have the most famous escape room for programmers, that's Vim. We have NeoVim and stuff like that. And so we don't want to write the plugin for every single IDE out there. So there should be a solution to it. So, and there is a solution. There is a language server protocol created by Microsoft back in the days when they were releasing VS Code, I think around 2016 or something. Yeah, and this protocol grew to kind of a common protocol for language support and other IDEs as well. So the idea behind it, it's that simple. We have a client which is integrated into IDE, and we have a server that's shared for all the we can use the same server for all the IDEs. Yeah, and server is doing all the heavy lifting, and client is just like showing the results that server provides. So the idea sounds great. So let's then answer a question: how hard is it to build a plugin using the language server now? Of course, taking as granted that the language server already exists for your language. So 2 years ago, JetBrains added native support for LSPs. And now creating plugin using LSP is very easy. So the first thing you have to do is to inherit the LSP server support provider, and then it will, the main method that has this file open that will be called on every file being open, as the name suggests. And then you just check, do you want to start the server, the LSP server for your file or not? And then we can just check the extension, for example, if we are supporting the language. And then we start the server using the descriptor that we also have to provide. And this descriptor mostly says, like, this is the command line we should create and start the server with. And there is also one more thing to check, do we want to track the file content in editor and sync it with the language server, or we're fine with just using the version on the disk. So given all these 50 lines of code, we've got our LSP working, but not exactly, because after we are doing that, we get almost white document with some colorful letters, but yeah, it still looks quite bland. So actually, this is specific of my LSP server because it doesn't provide a lot of semantic highlighting, but there is another specification that can help us here. There is a text-made grammar. And if you have a language server for your language, you most likely have TextMate as well. And we can bundle TextMate grammar with our plugin with like 5 more lines of code, and then we'll have the full highlight, the semantic one, and the usual one regex based. So that's good. So under the 100 lines of code, we did all the work. So we have LSP working, we have auto-completion, we have all the documentation, all the pop-ups, all the quick fixes. And like, isn't life is kind of sad when we are writing only 100 lines of code? Every software developer wants to write more and learn something new. And actually, we are not living in a fairy tale, so this is only the start, because we have several questions to address as well. So the first one, and the obvious one, is the LSP server distribution. So what I did when implementing the descriptor is just running the bundled server. And it's bundled only for my platform. So I'm on Windows, so it's only for Windows. But there are some people using MacBooks, and I heard that it's finally a year of Linux on the desktop again. So we need more binaries, and then our plugin size will be bigger. So for example, like 15 megabytes for my LSP, and I would say it's not ideal. And then also plugin releases will be tied to the language server releases, because if something new is out, then you have to update your plugin, and it can be like every week. And then still marketplace reviews could be fast, but it's not ideal to do them every week, I think. And also, if the new LSP version is back somehow, then you'll be like, the users will have a hard time to switching back to the older version of the plugin, because most likely they will have to go to a marketplace page and then download the older version. So there is a better solution. Let the user decide. It's not that UX friendly, but at least we provide some possibilities. So user can just choose any binary on their system. And the most ideal solution, in my opinion, is implementing some kind of auto download. So you download the LSP binary for the platform, which you can get with the IntelliJ APIs, and then use it. So I ended up doing both. So I have the auto download system, which downloads latest by default, and then you can still choose another version if you prefer it, or if there are some bugs that prevent you from working happily. And if you need, for some corner cases or for some testing, you can still provide the binary manually as well. So that's the first problem we solved. It took me around 500 of lines to do this. And we also have to learn coroutines along the way. So that's funny. And I also had to manage a lot of other file downloads for my language because it needs some definitions to work properly. So that's why it took so much. But then, before that moment, we were treating LSP like as a black box. So we didn't try to see what's inside. But from time to time, you get some bugs, both in LSP and maybe in the LSP support. So you need to debug them, and to debug them, you need to understand how the LSP works. And the LSP is quite simple. It's a JSON RPC protocol with two types of messages. So we have requests, which requires a response, and we have notifications. Both of these messages could be initiated by server and the client. So request can be sent from client and request can be sent from a server. And the message structure is also straightforward. So we have basic JSON RPC fields here. We have method to say to the server which action do we want to do now. And then we have params. And we also have ID. And ID is used to find the response for the request, because they are, of course, sent all asynchronously and can come up in different order. So to match them, we use IDs. And one day LSP stopped working in my IDE, and I spent some time debugging, and the reason turned out to be simple. This ID can actually be both number and a string. So LSP protocol allows both. But LSP offer was doing some internal refactoring, and since the LSP offer only works on VS Code, they ignored that the ID could be a string, and IntelliJ uses strings. So the plugin was broken for a week, unless I have this fancy version, like fancy mechanism to choose a version. So I just switched to the older version of the LSP for the time being. So then to fix these bugs like this, you don't need to write anything, but you still get to read some C++ code if your language server is written with that. So that's interesting. And then also, as always, introducing one more layer in your architecture increases the amount of work you have to do while debugging. So bugs are everywhere. They can be both in LSP, both in your implementation, and both in IDE support for, like, in LSP client. So one day I was happily updating my WebStorm to 2025.1, and all the errors were gone from my projects. Like, while it's good to have no errors, there was something wrong, definitely. So it took me a couple of hours to find the reason, and along the way I learned more about the protocol. Yeah, and like, small note, as a biologist, the spiders are not bugs actually, so they are from a separate group. So to debug this issue about diagnostics, I had to learn about them. So there are two types of diagnostics in LSP protocol. There are published diagnostics, the older one. They are notification based. So the server sends a notification with diagnostics, like with all the problems, like type issues and other issues as well, when it feels like it. So you don't have any control, and that's the problem, because you can have an open file, and LSP server can try to analyze the rest of the project instead. And there is a newer model that's pull diagnostics. It's request based. So the client requests diagnostics for the specific file or the specific set of files, and then gets them. And so if there are older and newer versions of some stuff, and there are different features in LSP, there should be definitely a way for both server and client to communicate which versions do they support. And there is one version. So when you start the LSP, the client sends an initialized request to the language server, listing all the capabilities it supports. So, like, does it support hover pop-ups? Does it support semantic highlighting? Does it support diagnostic, like older diagnostic, newer diagnostic, and stuff like that? And then server also responds with the capabilities it has and can provide. And after client receives the server response, it also, after some time, sends initialized notification to say that, yeah, I'm completely done with digesting all that you sent to me, and we're happy and can start working. So in the 2025.0 4.1, there was a new feature, the support for pull diagnostics, but it's not turned on by default. But the configuration for the initialization has changed. So there was added just 2 lines. So we support diagnostic and it can be dynamically registered. And seeing these 2 lines, my language server decided that, oh, okay, so the client can support pull-based. So we will just turn off the push-based, the older one. And IDE didn't have pull version, the newer one, on. So like IDE is doing nothing, server is doing nothing. They're all happy except for me. So I had to fix this. The simplest fix is just this 2 line. We just change the capabilities and rewrite them to be as they were before the update. The better fix would, of course, be turning them off if we can, turning them on if we can. But it will, since I support several versions before the diagnostics were introduced, I'll have to do some fancy reflexing to use a class that's not existing in some older binaries. So I just decided to turn it off for now and starts working with it when we update to 2025.1 as like the baseline. So yeah, the fix for this problem was 1 line more code, but you read a lot of C++ stuff and a bit of LSP spec, and LSP spec is quite big, I would say. So to debug all these problems, we also have to know where the logs live. So to turn on the LSP logs, you need to provide this like debug handler in debug log settings. And then if you are running your plugin in the older versions of IDE, then the logs will be in the main log. Like they will be just among other logs IDE does. And if you are on the newer version, then you have separate file per LSP in language services folder, and you can find this folder via all actions palette. So you can just click show log in Explorer and see them there. And also this change to diagnostic may raise a question. So like if there are some changes you are not aware about, how you can know about them. So of course the best source is LSP sources, so you can download them and look for them. There are still some issues with the download sources button regarding LSP in IDE. So there is an issue mentioned on the slide. So there are some ways to overcome this. And then the next place would be utrack. You can set up a filter for core LSP features, and then you'll see all this stuff happening with LSP, when the support was added and what will be supported, and maybe some future plans, because usually all the issues are well documented. And of course, there is a JetBrains platform already mentioned, where you can ask other people or JetBrains what's happening. Okay, and finishing on the initialization part, if you want to show these pretty language services pop up with the version of your language service, LSP protocol also handles that. And there is a special field in initialize result the server sends, the server info, which you can populate and use to display the version automatically. It's not implemented in all LSPs because usually VS Code ignores that. So you have to contribute that if you need. So yeah, it's 10 lines of C++ code as well and CMake, so it's not the funniest thing to do. Okay, talking about all that, we have a vague idea, I guess, that there are different features supported by LSP, but how many features are there in general? We have quite a lot, actually. So we can support linters because there are diagnostics and code actions. We can support formatters because there are different formatting actions we can take. We can enhance documentation with LSPs. For example, like on hover, we can add new refactorings because there are actions like code action and apply edit. So a server can send you edits and then IDE will apply them. And we can also support frameworks with LSP, of course, because we can use all the above for this. And actually, we can do even more because LSP protocol allows custom messages as well. So you can do whatever you want, basically. You can send a message to turn off the heating or turn on the refrigerator if you want as well. So with all these features, there should be some configuration as well. So there is a special request response for that. So the idea is still simple. The client, in this case, the server is requesting the configuration and the client responds with it. And then language server usually caches this configuration and uses it. So there is a special mechanism to update them. So in this case, client should say send a notification saying to the server like, hey, I have updated my configuration. Could you re-request it again, please? And then after some time, when the server feels like it, it can send a request configuration again and then get a response. I still don't know how this is this supported by IntelliJ, because I haven't found any information on the UTrack and in the docs. So that would be nice to get an answer later in the discussion. So currently I'm just reloading my language server when I apply some configuration changes. Since the LSP support by IntelliJ is quite new and it's still experimental, not all the features are supported, but like most of them are, like more than 50%. So the ones that are not supported are rename, and they're in parentheses the statistics from IDE, how many times do I use the feature. Rename is not supported, then selection range is not supported as well. That's the clever selection when you go up to semantic units in the code. Code lenses and code vision are not supported as well for LSPs, and like code vision is the stuff almost like inlay hints, but they can be both above and inlay, and they do some action when you click on them. So the new code vision stuff opens the blame, and usages just opens a pop-up in this case with the usages that you can navigate to. And then document symbols is also not supported. So all the stuff like breadcrumbs, sticky lines, and the structure view is not always supported. But actually, that's the problem of doing talks on experimental technologies, because while I was doing the talk 2 weeks ago, there was no support. But then when I tried it a couple of days ago, the support is there already. So in 2025.3, there will be support for document symbols. What should we do if the feature is missing? Like it is there in LSP, for example, but it's missing in the native support for now. You can either implement it yourself, because you can get the language server and send all the commands manually, get the results, and then process them as you want. Or you can also use some alternative clients, because there is a LSP for IntelliJ client made by someone from Red Hat, I guess, which supports more things currently. But the JetBrains native support is almost full as well. So I think in a year, it should be on the same level. So if we want to do things manually, it's quite simple. So we can get our language server via the LSP server manager. So usually we use one language server per project, so it's fine to just get the language server given your provider and then use it. So, and then, yeah, you can see that we are using here the rename command. So we are sending it, then we are waiting for the results, and then we are applying workspace edits. And there is 100 lines more above to apply them. So totally, we can implement rename even right now with 150 lines of code, but it's infinite amount of bugs, because the feature is actually quite sophisticated, because we need to rename across several documents. LSP supports two actions actually. So there is a prepare rename and rename, and prepare rename just checks if we can rename the stuff. It's like a simple fast check. And then if it works, then we can send a rename one and do all the stuff, get all the edits and apply them. And there are even, I think there are more corner cases, because when I looked at the LSP for IntelliJ sources where they implement rename, they actually doing the reference resolution themselves. Like they are asking LSP especially to get them all the references to the variable they are renaming and renaming them as well manually. I think that's what language servers should do, but if they have this code, maybe that's not supported by all language servers, so it's safer or easier to also handle on the client, which is a bit weird, but still, we're living in the real world. Yeah, and having learned all this about LSPs, we still have two more exciting things. So like the first one is that all the parsing, language analysis, indexing, and all the stuff is still there. So like we are not doing it in IntelliJ, but we're still doing it on the language server side. So there are still indexing. So for example, next time when you think that IntelliJ is slow, you can remember that it takes Ruby LSP in VS Code 40 seconds to start because it's also indexing files. They are just usually not reporting it to VS Code. So you have no progress bar and you think that it's already working, but it's not. Yeah, and the second good thing is that LSP is made as language agnostic as possible. So the client is not supposed to do anything clever. So all you get is just results to the actions you send, but you don't have any AST to work with client side, because it would actually be quite slow to send it for all the file edits as well. So if your LSP doesn't do the thing you want, the only way is to work on the LSP itself. So you have to go to the language server and add the features there. And usually they are built in the same language you are writing the LSP for. So for example, like Ruby LSP is written in Ruby and Haskell LSP is written in Haskell and so on. But in my case, the LSP is written in C++, so I have a hard time contributing. So in reality, you can write as much code as you wish and learn as much stuff as you want while still using language server. They simplify some things, but you still have other things to concentrate on. So let's sum up some pros and cons of relying on language server protocol and language servers. So the biggest advantage is, of course, simple maintenance, because if there is a language server already maintained, by the way, for example, by language team itself, it's much easier for them to support it. So you don't have to do that. And then the minuses, like the disadvantages, are quite small. So you have less control over implementation of some front-end like features like selections and foldings and stuff like that. You don't have support for all the IntelliJ features from LSP. And there is also some minor performance overhead because you have to send all the messages, get them back, and yeah, it's not instant. So, and I also have a final advice for you if you will be building a language. If you are building a language plugin, now I would still suggest starting with language server if it's there for your language, because it will be much faster start and you can publish the language plugin as early as possible and the people will be happy. Then you still can gradually build extra support with IntelliJ platform. So you still can be your Lexer parser in IntelliJ with all the grammar kit stuff and support some fancy refactoring, supports your own foldings, support your own selection ranges and stuff like that, because it's an easy part of a language. You can do whatever you want there. But I would still advise to keep reference resolution, type inference, and completion LSP side, because this is the hardest part. And for example, I remember that there was a talk about TypeScript, and the WebStorm team had a hard time trying to replicate all the TypeScript in type inference because it's always updating. And then you can also implement some missing features manually or just try other LSP clients in IntelliJ as well. So that's all. And I also have a, like, since the conference is free, there should be some ads, and I have an ad for you. I have a small article about building the same plugin, but it's mostly about Lexer and parser stuff. So if you need some advice and help there, you can check the article and I know, ping me. and I can try to help. So that's all. So I see I have here I have some useful links, the playground repo with the basic code for the LSP support that I used. Then there's a Luau plugin that I created, and there are, of course, links to JetBrains platform and the main LSP docs. So thank you all for the attention.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a really great talk. And with the last slide, you actually answered the question that appeared in our chat. I'll quickly showcase it. Yeah, is there any open source plugin for language support with LSP? So yes.
Yeah, there are actually quite a lot. So mine is not the first one. There is a, I think it's Prisma ORM for front-end development. That's like the JetBrains example, and there are other plugins as well, which use
Yes.
LSPs already.
What I would like to add here is also mention the tool that we have at JetBrains. It is called IntelliJ Platform Explorer. Let me bring my screen to the stage. Yes, I've pasted link in chat. So basically, this is plugins.jetbrains.com/IntelliJ Platform Explorer, and here you can search for open source repositories and open source code that is implementing specific extension points. So here we can also search for LSP. And yeah, here is server support provider extension point, for example. Okay, not much to show here, but yeah, many other extension points are already implemented by third-party plugins.
Yeah, I think it's because the language support was migrated, so LSP is now in a different package. So that's why the previous link was almost empty.
Yeah, thanks for clarification. Yes. Yeah, so
I got a question.
Yeah, go on.
So, I mean, you're aware of, JetBrains gets often a lot of heat about the indexing and stuff, right? And from the user's perspective, I really understand that, because you don't care how something works, it just needs to work, and that needs to work fast, right? But if you have a bigger code base, and basically what we do is parsing everything through and storing the information and the model of the code so that we can do all the clever things that we do, right? So if you have an LSP, and I think you said that already perfectly, either it doesn't have the feature or it needs to do a similar amount of work to have the feature, right? So can you say something about, so you mentioned renaming on the LSP. Can you say something about what they need to do behind the scenes? Because they also need to build an index, because they need to know where some code is used, where it's imported from, and what are all the references that need to be renamed, right?
Yeah, for sure. So that depends on the language. In my language, renames are a bit easier, like some renames, because they are mostly in terms of one file, of a single file, but still there is indexing, of course, and there's even a setting for max files to be indexed, which you never see in IntelliJ, because it can digest, I guess, an infinite amount, or like almost infinite, and language servers cannot. So I have like 10,000 files in index maximum, and then it will just not work. Yeah, so all the reference resolution still has to be done. So language server is not something magical. It's almost the same thing, but just like platform agnostic.
Yeah. So because I'm always a bit confused about the whole lightweight editor versus very heavy IDE discussion, right? So the answer is simple. If you want a lightweight editor, just open an editor that does basic highlighting for a file, but then you're missing out on all the features, all the code analysis, inspections, and so on, all the things you get basically when you have a deep code analysis. And it doesn't matter if it's done in IntelliJ or if it's done in an LSP server, right? So that's always a bit boring. So I think we have some more question. So from Chris, who asks, Jacob, can you bring it up? Is it possible to have an IDE native feature functionality also implemented in an LSP? I think you answered that already, right? But maybe you can repeat it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly the question is about, like which functionality, for example. But yeah, any extension point you have in IntelliJ, you can just run the LSP server there and run your own custom command or the existing command in LSP that does exactly that. So I think some sophisticated refactorings can be implemented like that, because there is no built-in support for like change signature, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
let's say you have a very complicated feature in your language, like for instance, changing the signature or changing the type or something, and it's not implemented in LSP. Then you have the choice to implement it in your plugin and do the edits just over the LSP and inform the LSP. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you have you have two ways. Either you build it like full LSP mode, so you go to the language server and build there the stuff, because changing the signature will also require some reference resolution to update all the usages. So it will have to be built on the language server. And then from IDE, you will just send a custom message. For example, you have a change signature method with all the custom params, and then a language server does that. Either you do this on the IDE stuff if you have Lexer and parser already, so you have some basic AST. You can, for example, trigger the built-in IntelliJ feature and then just apply the edits through LSP. I think should work as well.
So, but if you want to change it on the LSP, you probably need to work with the language that the LSP is written in, right?
Yep.
So you mentioned that already, and it might be C++. It might be, I don't know, OCaml or some other obscure language.
Yeah, usually it's the language you are working with. So
you're working with, right? Okay, I think Chris has a follow-up question. So, if so, how do you deal with turning off the functionality on LSP side so that it does not interfere with the IDE native implementation, or is there no need for concern?
Yeah, there could be some concern about it, but you can do the configuration. So you have these capabilities, and you can just turn off the capability. So you just say that IntelliJ IDEA does not support and does not need, for example, refactorings or completion, and then it will never ask for them. So that's the idea.
Yeah, a very good question, Chris. I think Andre has another question. If the LSP needs to be aware of all the project files written in my DSL, can I send them to all the initialization, or does each file need to be opened before it's sent to the LSP?
So the language server is usually working on the same machine. So language server has access to all the files on the file system on its own. So you don't need to send all the files to the LSP. It can just read them. What IntelliJ is doing, it's sending the files currently being added to LSP, because they are not on disk. They are in some virtual file system. So this one's idea should synchronize, but I don't think you have all project files being edited at the same point. So you just send the small amount, and it's done automatically by IntelliJ, because there is support for that, like did open and did change notifications. And the rest LSP can read on its own. So you don't need to open all the files. That's to answering the question.
Okay, thank you. So I think finally, could you have a summary? Because I think your talk was called LSP versus the joy of learning, right? So I did my language with a custom parser because there was no LSP when I started. It came later. And also, I wanted the joy because I wanted to understand. One of the goals was to understand the language to a degree where I really have the full view of how basically things are evaluated in code. So what would be your path? I mean, you mentioned it. Start with an LSP in your talk, and then because maybe we should point out one thing, which is how hard it is or how hard it can be to implement a parser, a custom parser, right? So that's one thing that, because I brought it here because when you were talking, so these are one of the two books I have. I think one is the standard guide and the other one, I'm not sure which one, because there are really many ways of parsing language syntax, and it depends on the syntax and what class of language the syntax is, right? And there are many ways, and we have one thing with IntelliJ or with the platform that people are usually not aware of, which is you have a parser that can parse through, and that's okay. But for IntelliJ and for IDEs in principle, you need a parser that parses every crap you throw at it, right? And doesn't stop. Because the user's not helped if you stop right through the file and doesn't do the work to the end. You need to go through. So you need a very error-resistant parser that parses everything. And that is a bit tricky because no compiler will do that. All the compilers will just stop when they reach an error, and or most of the compilers. I'm not sure if all, right? So it's a thing on top. So do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, so I think not all the compilers are like that. I was also making this point in my article, but then I thought that Rust compiler is quite clever, so they're highlighting all the errors, and I think like our Luau compiler is also quite clever. But yeah, writing lexer and parser is hard, but it's not as hard as indexing and type inference if you need it, because you do it once and language changes very slowly, but type inference can change like faster, and it's hard to keep in sync. So writing your lexer and parser is easy, to some extent easy, depending on the language. Of course, if it's hacks where you have C injections, that's much harder.
Yeah.
So answering the question, which path do I choose and did I have the joy? Yeah, I actually started the custom lexer and parser because my goal was not just to support the language. My goal was to learn how it's done properly, finally, because my previous attempt was like more toy examples. So yeah, and I also tried reading Dragon Book about compilers. I'm like halfway through it. It's quite interesting. So I did all the stuff, but there, like, the point was that there is still some joy as well, even if you use language server. So like using language server just speeds up the initial development, I think, and it may help you in some places, but you still have a lot to do if you want a decent support in the end.
Okay. So let that be the final words. Aleksandr, I thank you very much for joining. It was a really nice talk. We will continue.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks again.
One more thing in terms of LSP API. I'm not sure if you missed that or not. Yesterday, I asked our colleague Tomasz Błachut, who is working on LSP API, to post the status update of what is going to be introduced in 2025.3. So in our forum, I'll just paste the link. We have a nice list of features. What is going to be available, and we are updating SDK docs in that matter as well.
Yeah, I just saw it like a couple of days ago because I understand that updating docs on the experimental features is hard. Yeah, and I also wanted to briefly mention that LSP will be available for free, like for all the IDs now, starting 2025.3. So now it's only in paid versions, but it will be for everyone. So it will be much
exactly.
better.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. All right. See you, Aleksandr. Great to have you here.
See you.
Bye-bye.